There's a moment in life when silence feels louder than words. When you sit there, maybe in your car after work, maybe at your kitchen table, and realize you've been showing up for everyone except yourself. You've given your time, your loyalty, your heart, to jobs, to people, to dreams that never looked back. And still, somehow, it wasn't enough. They replaced you. Maybe not officially, but quietly, emotionally, slowly. And that's when the question hits like a whisper that's been waiting to be heard. What happens when you stop trying to earn your worth and start remembering it was never up for negotiation in the first place? This isn't just a story about being unappreciated. It's about waking up from the trance of trying to prove yourself to people who are never looking. It's about what happens when you finally stop chasing validation and start walking toward peace. Because the truth is, the world will always find a way to replace people who don't know what they're worth. But it will never be able to replace someone who finally does. So this story is about you. It's about the quiet power that comes from choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else. About the strength hidden inside the word enough. Meet Ethan. He wasn't extraordinary. At least, that's what he believed. He worked a regular job at a small firm, lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment, and carried a smile that didn't always match what was going on inside. He was the kind of person everyone relied on because they knew he'd never say no. He covered shifts, stayed late, fixed others' mistakes, and answered texts at midnight. The office couldn't function without him. Or at least, that's what they made him believe. He told himself it was fine, that one day, all the sacrifice would mean something, that the late nights, missed birthdays, and skipped meals would lead somewhere. He thought the world rewarded loyalty. But loyalty without boundaries isn't loyalty, it's self-abandonment. Then came a day it all cracked. A promotion he'd been quietly working toward for 3 years, given to someone newer, louder, flashier. Someone who knew how to make themselves seen. Ethan congratulated them with a practiced smile. But inside, something broke. Not out of jealousy, but out of recognition. He finally saw the pattern and his place in it. Driving home that night, the city lights blurred through the rain. He gripped the steering wheel and wondered, what if the problem isn't that they don't see my worth, but that I've forgotten it myself? That thought stayed with him, echoing quietly through every routine task, every late-night email, every morning coffee that tasted like exhaustion. Over the next few days, something inside him shifted. He started noticing things he'd ignored for years. The way people spoke over him in meetings, the way his ideas were praised only when repeated by someone else, the way he said it's fine after being overlooked again and again. He realized how many times he'd minimized his own needs. How often he'd said yes out of fear. Fear of disappointing, fear of being replaced, fear of being seen as difficult. He remembered how his father once told him, work hard and people will notice. But he was learning, in the real world, working hard only matters when you also work smart, and when you refuse to disappear in the process. He'd been taught humility was a virtue, but no one told him that humility without self-respect turns into invisibility. A few weeks later, he ran into his old mentor, Paul, a retired teacher who had seen hundreds of students rise and fall chasing other people's approval. They sat down for coffee, and after a few minutes of small talk, Paul looked at him and said, you know, Ethan, people don't leave because you're replaceable. They leave because they can. But the moment you know your worth, you stop waiting for them to stay. Ethan froze. The words sank deep, like a key unlocking something he didn't know was locked. He'd been waiting his whole life for someone to recognize his value, when all along, the only recognition that truly mattered had to come from within. That night, he turned off his phone for the first time in months. No notifications, no noise, just quiet. And in that quiet, he realized something simple yet life-changing. He had spent so much time trying not to disappoint others that he had completely disappointed himself. Then came the breaking point. A Monday morning meeting. His boss, without hesitation, asked him to cover for a colleague again, with no credit, no appreciation, just expectation. He could feel his heart racing, his palms sweating, his throat tightening, the familiar signs of surrender. But this time he didn't fold. He looked up and said, softly but firmly, "I can't do that today." The room went silent. It wasn't defiance. It was clarity. He didn't know an explanation. He didn't know an apology. That small act of resistance wasn't about saying no to a task. It was about saying yes to himself. And in that stillness, something inside him exhaled. It wasn't peace that came from being liked. It was peace that came from self-respect. Transformation rarely happens in big, cinematic ways. It happens in the small, consistent choices we make after the breaking point. Ethan began to reclaim his time. He stopped staying late. He started going for evening runs again, cooking his own meals, calling his mother just to talk. He even started writing again, something he hadn't done since college. At first, his words were clumsy, but they were his. And in every sentence, he found a piece of himself returning. The world around him didn't suddenly become kinder, but he had changed, and that made everything look different. People noticed. Some didn't like it. They called him distant, changed, not the same. But Ethan smiled because he finally understood. When you stop letting others define your worth, they'll try to convince you that you've lost it. One evening, he sat by the window, watching the city fade into twilight. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was falling behind. He wasn't chasing promotions, validation, or recognition. He was chasing something deeper: peace, purpose, presence. He thought about all the times he'd said yes when he wanted to say no. All the times he'd apologized for existing too loudly or shining too brightly. And he realized that knowing your worth isn't about arrogance. It's about accuracy. It's about seeing yourself clearly, without the distortion of someone else's expectations. Sometimes, life teaches you through absence. Through the jobs you lose, the people who leave, the silence that follows. Not as punishment, but as preparation, clearing the noise so you can finally hear your own voice again. Because you can't be replaced by people who never truly saw your worth. They can only lose access to it. That's the quiet revenge of self-awareness. It doesn't demand, it withdraws. When you know your worth, you stop explaining your boundaries. You stop overcompensating. You stop chasing love that has to be earned. And that's when life begins to align. Not because everything gets easier, but because you finally stop fighting yourself. The universal truth is this: life will test you. It will undervalue you. It will push you to the edge just to see what you'll tolerate. But those moments aren't meant to break you. They're meant to reveal you. Your worth isn't proven when others recognize it. It's proven when you no longer question it. You teach people how to treat you by what you allow, by what you accept, and by what you stop chasing. The world mirrors the standards you set for yourself. Not the ones you preach, but the ones you live. And when you finally know your worth, something powerful happens. You stop auditioning for roles you were born to play. You stop watering dead plants, waiting for them to bloom. You stop giving discounts on a soul that was never on sale. Ethan didn't become rich or famous. He became something far rarer: unshakable. He started walking slower, speaking softer, smiling wider. He didn't have to prove anything anymore. His presence spoke for itself. People who once overlooked him began to notice. Not because he tried harder, but because he didn't try at all. He carried peace like armor. And in a world obsessed with noise, that kind of quiet confidence is unreplaceable. That's the elixir, the calm that comes when you stop being replaceable. Not because others changed, but because you finally did. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who's forgotten their worth too. Because sometimes, all it takes is one reminder, one spark, to help someone remember who they were before the world made them doubt it. You are not replaceable. You never were. You just forgot how powerful it feels to truly know it. Remember this: when you stand in your worth, the world can't replace you. It has to rise to meet you.